The first season of the last Star Trek show is in the books. All 10 episodes have been released, and I can finally tell you in hopefully less than excruciating detail what I think about Season 1 of Star Trek Starfleet Academy. Let us begin with an episode-by-episode rundown, and just a heads up if you haven't watched the show yet. I'm not going to go super in-depth, but I will be discussing things that happen in the show, so be aware that spoilers lie ahead. Episode 1, Kids These Days. So here we are in the 32nd century, a rebuilding era for the Federation and Starfleet. A voiceover catches everyone up on the when and the what. There was a big disaster called the Burn about 100 years ago that messed things up real bad for a real long time, but in the past few years, things have started to get better, and Starfleet is reopening the Academy for the first time in a century. Sounds like a series premise to me. We meet most of our major players, Captain Nala Ake, Caleb Meir. We first see Caleb as an adorable little kid with an AI Teddy Ruxpin, who I'm just going to go ahead and assume is evil and will be returning as a villain in Season 2. Then we jump ahead to Caleb as the incredibly jacked 20-year-old he will be for the rest of the series. Caleb's mom, Anisha, who is absent for most of the season following this episode, but is still important. Big bad Noose Braca, also mostly absent after the first episode, but also still very important. And most of the cadets we're going to follow. Darum, Jaden, Sam, Genesis. We also meet most of the other important adult characters, namely the Doctor, yes, that Doctor, the one from Voyager, and Cadet Master and Captain Ake's first officer, Lura Thok, who is of mixed Klingon Jem'Hadar heritage, and a woman, a fact which sent a certain kind of fan spiraling into spasms of impotent fanboy rage because how can there be a female Jem'Hadar? It's a made-up TV show, and it takes place like 1,000 years after the last time we saw the Jem'Hadar, so there you go. Now shut the fuck up, nerd. Thok is one of my favorite characters on the show for how surprisingly and unfailingly funny she is. If you have a problem with her because you think she breaks canon or whatever, that's your problem, and you're a fucking loser who needs to get over your fixation with treating Star Trek like it's real life instead of a work of fiction created by hundreds of storytellers across multiple generations, platforms, and creative regimes that can be altered to suit the needs and desires of those storytellers as they see fit. Oh, and the Doctor is good in this. I was skeptical because he's a legacy character, and I'm generally wary of those after how hard not only Star Trek, but popular media in general has leaned into legacy and nostalgia over the last couple of decades. But the Doctor works well here and feels like a character in this show, not a, hey, look who it is, glorified cameo. However, I did not care for the callback to his tricorder, medical tricorder line from the Voyager pilot. And after he says it, he doesn't even use a tricorder on anybody. It doesn't even work in the context of that scene. I want to set it on fire. But other than that, he was good. This first episode has a lot of table setting to do, both in terms of character arcs and season-long plots, and it does a pretty good job of it. Having watched it twice and had some time to think about it, I still think the opening section is clunky and crowded, and I'm not 100% sure we actually need the prologue with little Caleb and his mom, or at least we don't need to see it when we see it. But the dynamic the episode sets up between the two lead characters, Captain Ake and Caleb, is fascinating. Ake is carrying guilt for separating Caleb from his mother. Caleb blames Ake and the Federation in general for taking his mother away, but also seems willing to trust Ake and recognizes that she is his best option at this point. Ake is a compelling character right away, a clearly good, caring person who nonetheless carries a heavy burden. Not just of guilt over how she handled the case of Caleb's mother, but of many other experiences she's had and choices she's made over the course of her very long life. Her default personality is upbeat, quirky, downright sprightly, but she's also capable of bringing wisdom and gravitas when needed. She's absolutely plausible as both a starship captain and the chancellor of the Academy, no matter how she chooses to sit in her captain's chair. And when I see her, I want to see more of her. which is the most important thing. The conceit of the hero ship, the USS Athena, also being the Academy itself, to the point that it actually lands in San Francisco and becomes part of the campus, is neat. It took me a minute to warm up to it. At first, it struck me as cute and needlessly complicated, but then I realized that it's kind of ingenious from a production standpoint. They can do episodes set on Earth and episodes set in space and just always use the same sets. Sets, by the way, that I like very much. The Bridge of the Athena and the Atrium, which is probably the set we see the most of throughout the season, are both very nice. And amidst all these introductions and setups, a Star Trek episode breaks out as the Athena is attacked on its way to Earth by the Venari Ral, fearsome space pirates led by Nus Braka. The cadets, who have only just met each other, and their professors/superior officers, manage to pull together and escape a dangerous situation and defeat the pirates, temporarily, through the power of teamwork. Everyone in the ensemble gets at least a moment or two to make an impression, and it's pretty good. A promising start to the series. Episode 2, Beta Test. In some ways, the second episode of a series is even more important than the first. The first episode is all about introducing the show, the characters, the premise. The second episode is our first look at what the show is actually going to be like on a regular basis. That doesn't mean we're completely through with those introductions and setups, however. In this episode, we meet another character, Terima, who will be a regular throughout the rest of the season, and we get our first look at the cadets from the War College, which is the institution that took the place of Starfleet Academy and trained officers during the era of the burn. Like I said, this is a rebuilding era for the Federation, and right now the most important brick in that rebuilding effort is the planet Beta Z, which left the Federation a long time ago and has been protecting its own behind a protective force field or something ever since. The leader of Beta Z comes to the Academy to negotiate with Admiral Vance and Captain Ake in hopes of having Beta Z rejoin the Federation, and hijinks ensue. Terima is the daughter of President Sadal of Beta Z, so naturally she and Caleb immediately become a thing, because what else is a poor kid who was just in prison like a week ago gonna do but fall in love with the daughter of an important world leader? Actually, to the show's credit, the poor boy rich girl thing isn't pushed all that hard with Caleb and Terima. Overall, the series does a fair job at avoiding cliches. The most obvious ones, at least. Caleb and Terima have good chemistry together that doesn't seem forced, which is important because a lot of the episode focuses on them, and the parts of the episode that don't focus on them work well also. The Betazoids, represented by President Sadal, are reluctant to return to the Federation fold, and the compromise that ultimately convinces them to come back, the Federation offering to move its seat of government to Beta Z, feels meaningful and easy to grasp even if you're not a Star Trek nerd and know nothing about the Federation or Beta Z outside of what this show has told you. President Sadal is deaf, and his deafness is presented in a casual, matter-of-fact way as no big deal. He's a person with a disability, and that disability is accommodated, and nobody even mentions it, really. It's exactly the sort of representation I like to see. In everything, but especially in Star Trek. Oh, and we also get our first appearance by Jet Reno, who joins this show as a recurring character following a run as one of the most reliably enjoyable members of the ensemble on Star Trek Discovery. Always good to see Jet Reno. What else? The War College. We see a lot more of it in the next episode, but as a first impression here, I like the War College. I like the idea of it. I like what it represents. Starfleet having to abandon its loftier ideals and focus on defense and militarization during the hard years following the burn. And I like the dynamic that exists between the War College and the newly reestablished Academy. More on that when I get to episode 3 in a minute. We get a standalone story with larger implications that also moves forward some issues introduced in the premiere, most notably Caleb's ambivalence about Starfleet and his desire to locate his mom. The fight between Caleb and Terima feels a little forced, and it won't be the last time I say that, but overall, another solid episode. Episode 3, Vitus Reflux. Our cadets try out to join the school team for a hilariously brutal sport, and there's also a prank war between the Academy and the War College. Now we're talking. This is the first episode to really lean into the frequently very goofy sense of humor of the series, which is something I'm glad to see the creators of Star Trek have rediscovered in the last few years. The early seasons of Discovery were so grim, as was most of the Picard series, so it's nice to see the more recent live-action shows, Strange New Worlds and now Starfleet Academy, being willing to embrace the silly side of Star Trek, which has been there since the very beginning. Once again, we get a lot of good character work, with most of his friends trying out for the sports team. Caleb is reluctant to join because he's used to being a loner and he's still very uncertain regarding this whole Starfleet thing. On the opposite end of that spectrum are Genesis and Darum, who spend the episode competing not just to make the team, but with each other to become team captain. Darum is constantly striving in vain to impress his distant, impossible-to-please parents, while Genesis is the child of an admiral and is busting her ass to live up to that legacy. They're rivals, but also they kinda like each other? Like each other? But also they kinda hate each other. Then again, Darum seems to simultaneously like and hate pretty much everybody, so who can tell? The sport they're playing in this episode is called Calica, and I love everything about it. I love how brutal it is. The players are metaphorically trying to kill each other, and the training sessions we see play like realistic simulations of war zones that have the cadets screaming in terror. I love how silly it is. In addition to the simulated combat, each team also has a costumed mascot who acts as a kind of goalie. And I love that it's something the writers of this show made up for this show. It's not Parisi squares. It's not any other sport we've heard about or seen on another Star Trek show. It's not an Easter egg. It's not a reference. It's a new thing. One of my favorite aspects of this series is its tendency to create new things instead of lazily reaching into the toy box for something we've seen before. As for the prank war, it's fun. It's a little one-sided until the end, but that's as it should be. The War College dominates the Academy, which serves to highlight that dynamic between the two schools that I mentioned when I was talking about Episode 2. The War College is now the most established institution. The Academy is sharing their campus. We Trekkies in the audience think of the Academy as the more venerable of the two, but the War College cadets view the Academy as the upstart, the interloper. That's such a fruitful situation for both drama and comedy because it places the Academy cadets in the position of the underdog. They're being embarrassed by the War College cadets, and they need to push back and fight back in a big way, and eventually they do. The prank war ending prank that the Academy cadets pull on the War College is a masterpiece of over-the-top goofball comedy involving stolen DNA, cloned eyeballs, a phony mascot disguise, and gigantic sentient plants that take over the War College dorms. And somehow, after all that wackiness, the episode still finds its way back to an earnest ending, where Darum graciously accepts Genesis as the Calica team captain, and Caleb puts on his team jacket and seems to be embracing the idea of joining the group. Another solid episode. 3 for 3 so far. Episode 4, Vox in Excelso. For this episode, the focus shifts to the character of Jaden, the Klingon cadet who is defying expectations associated with his species by pursuing a career in science and medicine instead of becoming a soldier. An episode centered on a member of the supporting cast? In a Star Trek show? I'm sorry, I know it's not that big of a deal. Strange New Worlds has done it a bunch. I'm just happy to see this current generation of Star Trek finally moving away from the overly serialized storytelling that did so much to drag down both Discovery and Picard. Anyway, Jaden. We get some backstory. He and his family lived on a planet together. Life was simple, but Jaden dreamed of leaving and going to the Academy. His father didn't approve, but his brother understood him. Then his brother died, and the rest of his family abandoned him and left the planet, and yada yada yada. Jaden applied to the Academy. It's a lot better than that. Those are just the bullet points. In the present, Jaden's story revolves around two things: the Academy Debate Club, led by the Doctor, and an ongoing refugee crisis involving the Klingons. It seems that during the Burn era, the Klingon homeworld was destroyed, and ever since, the Klingons have existed as a diaspora. In this episode, a ship carrying a large number of Klingon refugees, including Jaden's family, crashes. and the future of the entire species is uncertain. Starfleet identifies an uninhabited planet that would make a good new home for the Klingons, but good luck getting those prideful assholes to accept a gift from the Federation. Jaden works through both his grief and stress related to his family and his people, and his fear of public speaking, experiences tension between himself and Caleb, and finds unexpected support in the form of Darum. And eventually it all works out when Jaden finds his voice and suggests the solution to the Klingon problem. Pretend to fight the Klingons for the new planet. And it works, because the Klingons won't accept a gift, but they are completely fine with being patronized by a fake battle so they can tell themselves they won the planet through conquest instead. I'm not saying that as a criticism. I like it. The more ridiculous and hypocritical Klingons are, the better. Another good episode. The best episode of the season so far. In fact, I like Jaden as a character a lot. His friendship / possible attraction to Darum is nicely handled, and his relationship with Caleb is rocky in ways that feel natural, as opposed to some of the contrivances that have occasionally led to Caleb and Terima squabbling with each other. The conflict between Jaden and Caleb, which intensifies when they find themselves on opposite sides of the debate, is ultimately rooted in what they have in common. They've both lost their families. They're both survivors in a way. That's also what ultimately brings them back together at the end. And more new stuff. The bits of Klingon culture we see throughout the episode are all original to this show. The entrails-heavy warrior stew, the bow. I cannot tell you how nice it is to watch a new Star Trek show that doesn't feel like the writers were just copy-pasting stuff out of Memory Alpha articles. I sure hope they can keep that going. Episode 5, Series Acclimation Mill. Oh well, it was nice while it lasted anyway. The show was 4 for 4 heading into this episode, and after this episode, we'll call it 4 for 5. Still not a bad record. This is the Deep Space Nine episode of Starfleet Academy. Why is there a Deep Space Nine episode of Starfleet Academy? That's what I was asking myself the whole time I was watching it. Things start out promisingly enough. It's a Sam episode, told through Sam's perspective, with a lot of stylistic flourishes to emphasize that unique perspective. Some of it comes across as a little hyperactive, but then again, that's Sam, so it kind of works. I love Sam. I think of the entire excellent supporting cast, she's my favorite. She's very funny, she's sympathetic, she's lovable, she's a goddamn delight. Unfortunately, what starts out as a Sam episode soon veers off the road and becomes a Captain Sisko episode? Even though, aside from some repurposed Avery Brooks audio used in voiceover at the end, Captain Sisko does not appear in the episode. And also, in universe, the series is set nearly a millennium after the events of Deep Space Nine, and in the real world, Deep Space Nine has been over for almost 30 years? Okay. There's an attempt to justify all of this. Sam is a holographic being like the Doctor, or photonic, as her people prefer, and she has been sent to the Academy to learn about organic life forms and report back to her photonic makers so they can decide whether or not to establish more permanent relations between themselves and organics. Sam is their emissary. And when she learns about Captain Sisko, who was also an emissary, she becomes obsessed with finding out everything about him and solving the mystery of what happened to him after he disappeared into the wormhole at the end of Deep Space Nine. The, oh my god, he's an emissary too connection is the very definition of a thin premise, and it's not nearly a good enough reason to devote most of the show to a navel-gazing wankfest. This episode is everything I don't want Star Trek to be. Backwards looking, obsessed with its own fictional history, up its own ass, with reverence for itself, and an act of shameless fan indulgence, not just for the fans in the audience who lap up this slop, but for the creators themselves. I love Tawny Newsome, the co-writer of this episode, who also guest stars as someone. I was ultimately not a fan of Lower Decks, but I love Tawny Newsome. I think she is hilarious and talented, and if she wants to keep doing Star Trek, I am all for it, but this is not the kind of thing she, or anyone really, should be doing. I get that it was intended as a tribute to Sisko and Avery Brooks, and I understand the desire to pay tribute to that character. and that actor. I love Sisko and I love Avery Brooks, and I will forever be grateful to them and to Deep Space Nine. It's my favorite Star Trek show. It's one of my favorite shows ever, period. But whether it's directed at Deep Space Nine or any other series in the franchise, the last thing I want to see Star Trek doing is bending over backwards to pay tribute to itself. I already love Star Trek. I already think Star Trek is great. I don't need Star Trek telling me how great Star Trek is. People who like this sort of thing will say, it's a love letter to Star Trek. Yeah, and I don't watch Star Trek to see love letters to Star Trek. I watch Star Trek to see fucking Star Trek. It's always nice to see Cirroc Lofton, and for his sake, I'm glad he got to come back and hopefully got a nice payday out of it, but I just didn't dig any of this. It plays like professionally budgeted fan fiction, and a lot of it, including the reveal of the true identity of Tawny Newsom's character, is just embarrassing. It's no different than creating a fan series and casting yourself as Captain Kirk. And that's not even meant as a dig at fan series. I enjoyed Star Trek New Voyages and Star Trek Continues, but they were what they were, and they aren't what I want from the professionals who are actually working in the Star Trek franchise. The segments of the episode that aren't directly related to the Sisko stuff aren't that great either. There's a subplot involving Captain Ake helping Kelrek, the Chancellor of the War College, prepare for an important upcoming dinner with an alien ambassador that aims for comedy but ends up lying there as limp as the blobfish that's on the table for those scenes. It's a promising idea, but it plays as a scattered and slapped together afterthought, one of the few examples from this season of the show's sense of humor just utterly failing it. Some of the Sam-focused bits that don't directly connect to the Sisko stuff are good, or at least seem like they would have been good in another context. I love the Mork calling Orson setup for Sam to contact her makers back on her home planet, and the running gag of Caleb accessing Sam's systems to allow her to experience more of what organics feel, including getting drunk, is fun, and Carice Brooks is never anything other than delightful as Sam, but this is easily the low point of the season. The product of present-day Star Trek following all of its worst instincts. Episode 6, Come Let's Away. This is more like it. The Athena is out on a combined Academy War College training mission when it's attacked by scary space cannibals who hold a group of cadets hostage, and Captain Ake is forced to turn to the only man who's ever been known to defeat the scary space cannibals, her arch-nemesis Noose Braca, who returns for his first appearance since the series premiere. The episode is divided fairly evenly between the action aboard the Athena that focuses on Ake and Braca, and action aboard the wreck of the starship Miyazaki, where the cadets were sent on their training mission and where a small group that includes several of our main characters is trapped on the bridge trying to hold off those hungry space cannibals. Oh, and before any of that happens, Caleb and Terima finally get it over with and fuck. Good for them. They're both of age. It's not weird for me to say that, and I don't mean it in a dirty way. Anyway, I'm just saying it's nice that these two attractive young people who are obviously into each other had sex, and we got to watch some of it, that's all. It's nice. But things take a negative turn toward the end when Terima, who is Betazoid, let's remember, and has unusually strong psychic abilities, accidentally invades Caleb's mind and glimpses a memory of him being separated from his mother, which is something Caleb wasn't trying to share with her. So things are weird between them after that. But it turns out to be good that things are weird between Caleb and Terima, because now Terima can psychically communicate with Caleb, and that comes in handy when Caleb is among the cadets trapped on the Miyazaki, and Terima is back on the Athena. The best part of the episode is the Ake and Braca stuff, because we get to see an act-off between Holly Hunter and Paul Giamatti. As the villain and the more theatrical character, Giamatti gets most of the lines and most of the memorable business. But what really impressed me in their scenes together was how Holly Hunter is able to hold her space, often without saying a word, while Giamatti is chewing all the scenery in sight. It's a good lesson in how important it is for an actor to maintain their presence in a scene where they aren't obviously doing a whole lot. And it's a reminder of how multifaceted Captain Ake is as a character. Sometimes she brings the eccentric drunk aunt energy, and sometimes she's as dead serious all business as it gets. The other half of the episode with the cadets aboard the Miyazaki is a lot more action, plot-driven. They have to figure out how to restart the computer, then get the computer to recognize them as a legitimate crew of the ship, then boot up the ship's experimental engine to disrupt the jamming field the space cannibals are projecting that's blocking Athena from beaming everyone to safety. Their part of the story is very task-oriented, but it's also got some tension and some character beats. There's this Vulcan jerk-off named Bobby, who is a cadet at the War College and was one of the leaders of the prank war a few episodes back. So he and Caleb really don't like each other. It turns out there was a comic book series about the adventures of the crew of the Miyazaki before it became the wreck that it is today, obviously. And Bobby was a fan of that comic, and at first Caleb shits on the comic as Federation propaganda, but then he lets it slip later on that he's actually read the comic and he kind of likes it. Speaking of that comic, if the writers of Star Trek insist on using their Star Trek show to comment on and celebrate Star Trek, this is the way to do it. From the way the characters talk about it and the fleeting glimpses we get of its pages, the comic book based on the adventures of the Miyazaki is clearly meant as an analog of Star Trek itself, specifically the original series, right down to the style of uniforms the crew is shown to be wearing. Doing it this way has a couple of advantages over how it was done in Episode 5 with Sam's sudden and all-consuming Captain Sisko fixation. First, there's a built-in reason for some of the characters in this show to know and care about the adventures of the Miyazaki. It wasn't just history, it was the basis for a popular comic book. Our Starfleet Academy characters can talk about the Miyazaki without sounding like people who watch Star Trek instead of people in Star Trek. And second, it avoids pandering to the hardcore Trekkies in the audience and offering us a reward for picking up on a reference because of all the Star Trek we watched. Do you know who Dax is? Good for you. Have a cookie. Get the fuck out of here with that shit. Bobby does make an indirect reference to Spock at one point. He says the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, but he attributes it to a famous Starfleet officer, not Spock by name. I still wish they just wouldn't do shit like that at all, but at least they didn't highlight it, underline it, and circle it like would have happened in the previous episode. Also, Bobby dies after that, so he pays for it. Episode 7, Cosine, Spring Break! Sort of. Here they call it All Worlds Day, but it's basically the same thing. Everyone gets a few days off to go home, or to wherever. Everyone except Caleb, that is, who has no family, and convinces Captain Ake to let him hang out aboard the Athena during break, and Genesis, who is supposed to go see her big-shot Admiral father, but sneaks aboard the Athena for mysterious, quasi-nefarious reasons instead, and Darum, who is abducted back to his home planet for an impromptu wedding, and Jaden, who witnesses Darum's abduction and, not realizing what it is, follows Darum to his home planet and winds up stuck there as a member of the wedding party, which to me would be an occasion to bust out the seppuku knife, but maybe that's just me. Both sides of the story lean hard on sexual tension between their pairs of characters. While Caleb's feelings for Terima are more obvious, there's been an unspoken thing between him and Genesis all along as well, and the will they or won't they energy between Darum and Jaden gets more pronounced each time they find themselves alone with each other. Darum's bisexuality is established in episode 3, I think, and by this point, Jaden's also been established as gay and is kind of sort of dating Kyle, a benignly boring zero from the War College who can't get fridged fast enough to suit me. Is that still bury your gays if a gay character gets killed so that another gay character can have a much happier and more interesting life with someone else? I'm probably not the person who should decide that. Anyway, both Caleb and Genesis and Jaden and Darum have great chemistry together, and it's fun to watch them run around the empty halls of the Athena and stress out about Darum's wedding, respectively. There's some nice writing on display in the sense that while the two stories don't have anything directly to do with each other, they both build to resolutions that hinge on characters having hidden parts of themselves revealed and then dealing with the consequences of that. Genesis is eventually forced to reveal that she snuck back into school during break so she could hack into the computer and change her application. on which she falsified some references. As a result, Captain Ake drops her from consideration for a command training program and punishes her by putting her to work cleaning toilets or whatever. Darum gets married as planned, but when his wife, Kyra, hears Jaden's best man speech and realizes that Darum is reluctantly sacrificing his career in Starfleet in order to commit to their arranged marriage, she has the marriage annulled so that he can return to the Academy and continue to pursue the life he wants instead of the life the traditions of their people tried to force on him. It's another strong episode with good character beats. Caleb and Genesis get up to some enjoyable misadventures, chasing an escaped space slug around the Athena while not quite flirting. Genesis convinces Caleb to suck it up and send a message to Terima, who is back home on Beta Z after the events of the previous episode. Oh, I forgot to mention that. Terima used her mental superpowers to explode the heads of all the space cannibals that were attacking the cadets on the Miyazaki. It was fucking dope, but she feels bad about it, and also I think it took a physical toll or something. Anyway, after prodding from Genesis, Caleb finally sends her a message. And Jaden's toast at Darum's wedding is a nice full circle moment for his character, since earlier this season, in the debate episode, Jaden was so nervous about the prospect of speaking in public that he was shaking, and it was Darum who helped him cope with that. Episode 8, The Life of the Stars. While Sam travels back to her homeworld with the Doctor and Captain Ake to get treatment for debilitating malfunctions in her holographic body or whatever it is, the rest of the gang studies Our Town in a drama class taught by visiting Professor Tilly. Yay! Tilly's here. I love Tilly. Mary Wiseman is wonderful as Tilly, as I would expect, and in her guest appearance, she gets to show off both the fun side and the empathetic side of her character as she uses their discussions of Thornton Wilder's Our Town to help them work through their lingering trauma from the Miyazaki incident a few episodes back. Also, Terima returns from her convalescence on Beta Z, and she has been unenrolled from the War College where she was going and enrolled in the Academy because everyone decided that was a better fit for her for health reasons. She's not happy about it, and she sees right through Tilly's trauma counseling disguised as a theater course shtick, and she is not having it. But as good as Tilly and Terima and the Our Town stuff is, and it's very good, the episode belongs to the Doctor. All season long, Sam has been trying to get close to the Doctor, to enlist him as her mentor, idolizing him as a hologram, a photonic being who has lived among organic beings successfully for centuries, and all season long, the Doctor has been strangely cold to her. Not mean exactly, just keeping his distance. There's a heartbreaking moment where Sam, about to be examined by her makers and terrified, tearfully asks the Doctor to hold her hand, and the Doctor refuses. It's a dick move, but he's not trying to be a dick. Eventually, we find out why he didn't hold her hand, and, well, therein lies the heart of the story. It's a story that invites us to ponder what it's like to be the Doctor, to be someone who is ageless and essentially exists outside of time, surrounded by people who are very, very mortal. It finds a commonality between the Doctor and Captain Ake, who is essentially immortal herself and knows how the Doctor feels, though she is far more emotionally engaged in her life than the Doctor is at this point. It shows us characters in both stories, the cadets in Tilly's theater class and the Doctor, Captain Ake, and Sam, engaging with the text of Our Town in ways that are meaningful and thoughtful and ultimately moving. It's not a perfect episode. I'm on board with the emotional reason for the Doctor's forced distance from Sam, but I don't buy the specifics of it. I think it would have worked better if his decision to not get close to people was rooted in something other than what it's rooted in. Also, the solution to what's causing Sam to malfunction is basically to reboot her from scratch and allow her to grow up and experience childhood, which she didn't before because she was created as the equivalent of a 17-year-old. It's possible for her to start over and grow from infancy to her previous age in the space of only a couple of weeks because time passes much more quickly on her homeworld, Cask. 3 Earth days equals 5 years on Cask. That's all well and good, as is the Doctor's decision to remain on Cask and raise Sam himself. But Sam's entire childhood and adolescence is compressed into a few fleeting images in a montage. It's a very well done montage, though it does raise some questions, such as, was it just Sam and the Doctor the whole time? Did she not have friends or other adult mentors? And most importantly, it's a really big deal for Sam's character, and Sam emerges from it significantly changed, and we see almost nothing of it. I'm not saying we need to stop everything and make the whole show about Sam growing up for that development to work. Confining it to a single episode is the right way to go. I just think we need to see a little more of it than a brief montage. That's all. Having registered those criticisms, let me also say that ultimately, they don't really matter. There are things I think they could have or should have done differently here, but in the end, the episode works, and it works because of the performance of Robert Picardo, who absolutely sells this entire thing. And even if I do question the Doctor's specific reason for withdrawing from Sam, when I'm watching Picardo perform that scene, I believe it. And I feel for him. That's the most important part. It elevates the Doctor as a character, making him simultaneously more unknowable and mysterious and more wrenchingly human than he's ever been. It's Picardo's best work ever as the Doctor, probably his best work ever, period. And it's the biggest reason why this one is the best episode of the season. Having Tilly drop in didn't hurt either. Episode 9, 300th Night. It's almost the end of the school year. And that's not the only big thing going on. The Athena, with its complement of cadets, is on the way to Beta Z so that everyone can attend the dedication ceremony of the new Federation capital. But then, something unexpected happens, as you might expect, and everything is thrown into turmoil by those dastardly space pirates, Noose Brocka's gang, the Venari Rawl. See, something else I forgot to mention about Episode 6, a lot of stuff happens in that one, okay, is that at the end, it's revealed that Noose Brocka was secretly in cahoots with those space cannibals, and after he left the Athena following his little chat with Captain Ake, he took advantage of the distraction provided by the space cannibals to break into a secret Starfleet research station and steal a bunch of experimental weapons. Now, we find out that what he stole was a substance called Omega-47, which is so powerful that if you detonate a single particle of it, it can render an entire sector of space impassable by warp drive. With that threat hanging over everyone's heads, Caleb goes through a crisis of a more personal nature when he finally locates his long-lost mom, only to find that she's on a planet that is about to be annexed by the Venari Rawl. So, Caleb steals a shuttlecraft, and with Sam, Genesis, and Darum tagging along over his strenuous but vain objections, flies to the planet to reconcile with his mom before the shit hits the fan. Captain Ake finds out what Caleb and the others are doing, and she very quickly drops off the cadets on Beta Z, then takes the Athena after Caleb's shuttlecraft, with only herself, the Doctor, and good old Jet Reno on the ship. Oh, and they also discover that Jaden and Terima have stowed away because they want to help their friends. Caleb finds his mom, but they end up trapped on the planet when the Venari Rawl take over, and Genesis, Darum, and Sam are captured as Federation spies. Caleb and Anisha, his mom, intervene to prevent them from being executed, but there's a firefight and Anisha is wounded. But luckily, the Athena shows up in the nick of time and beams them all out of there, and the Doctor patches Anisha up, but then Anisha sees Captain Ake, and she's not happy about that because, remember, Anisha hates Starfleet and the Federation, and she especially hates Captain Ake because it was Captain Ake who separated her from Caleb back during the prologue of the first episode. And as if that's not enough, it turns out Noose Brocka has deployed mines containing Omega-47 particles all along the entire Federation border, and if any ship tries to cross the border, it will detonate the mines and plunge the Federation back into a dark age like the one it just now started to emerge from following the burn. Only one Federation ship, the Athena, which left Federation space to chase down Caleb's stolen shuttlecraft, is outside the perimeter of the mines. But what can they do to help? They're only one ship. Actually, half of one ship. The Venari Rawl showed up and stole most of it. Only the saucer section was able to detach and escape. To be continued. It doesn't say that on screen, but that's the gist of it. This isn't a bad episode, but like a lot of first halves of two-parters, it benefits from having the freedom to be almost all set up. It's satisfying to see elements that were introduced earlier in the season come into play, like Caleb's mom, and the dedication of Beta Z as the new capital, and the revelation of Noose Brocka's big evil scheme, but everything is left unresolved by design because they're setting up a cliffhanger. A cliffhanger! Oh man, we have to wait? What am I saying? These episodes are all out now. We don't have to wait for shit. Episode 10, Rubincon. Noose Brocka is back, and not only has he used his arsenal of stolen Omega-47 mines to cut the Federation off from the rest of the galaxy, he's also captured Captain Ake, and he's going to put her on trial for the crimes of the Federation, with Anisha, Caleb's mom, as the judge. While all that's going on, Jet Reno, the Doctor, Caleb, Genesis, Darum, Jaden, Sam, and Tarima are on the saucer section of the Athena, trying to figure out a way to locate where Brocka has taken Captain Ake and Anisha, and also to disrupt that minefield. Once again, both halves of the episodes have their strengths, but once again, as was the case with episode 6, the stronger half is clearly the one where Paul Giamatti and Holly Hunter get to act at each other. The thing is, while the Captain Ake stands trial for the crimes of the Federation portion of the episode is entertaining because of the performers involved, it winds up representing the show being the weakest and most wishy-washy, thematically speaking, that it's been all season. For me, one of the most interesting themes the show had going this season was the idea, occasionally brought to the forefront, but usually humming in the background, that the Federation and Starfleet have failed to live up to their stated ideals in a big way, and that they need to rebuild from that failure just as much as they need to rebuild their political alliances following the burn. In the first episode, Captain Ake regrets her participation in separating Anisha from young Caleb, even though that's what the law demanded of her. She resigned from Starfleet for 15 years over that. She went and got Caleb and brought him to the Academy and away from a life of crime and poverty in an attempt to make right what she had done wrong. What she had done wrong in the name of the Federation. Throughout the season, even as his bonds grow stronger with his friends and he starts to enjoy life at the Academy, Caleb remains largely dubious of Starfleet and the Federation, and that attitude is presented as understandable. Even Noose Brocka, who is never anything other than an amoral and opportunistic dirtbag, makes some good points, observing that many of the people who do business with him, a violent space pirate, are obtaining basic necessities of life from him that the Federation has failed to provide for them. It's not that the Federation and Starfleet are portrayed as evil, but they are portrayed as morally compromised institutions that have done bad things, and that the hardships imposed on everyone by the burn do not excuse those things. It's a really interesting take on the Federation, especially if you, like me, generally interpret the Federation as an analog of the United States or Western civilization more broadly. The Federation fighting to emerge from a period of moral and cultural darkness to live up to its lofty, professed ideals and actually be the kind of place it has always claimed to be. I don't know, as an American at this point in history, I find that very compelling. Why? Who can say? But in this episode, the writers lose their nerve. And that complicated view of the Federation and Starfleet is flattened so that they become essentially good, well-intentioned organizations who had to make some tough choices for a while there, but don't worry, they're back in the good guy business now, and you can't really get too mad at them for anything they did or didn't do during the burn era, because hey, times were hard all over, am I right? Captain Ake even defends her actions in sending Anisha to prison and separating her from Caleb, and puts the blame for it on Anisha. Now, okay, fair is fair. Ake is on trial for her life at the mercy of a murderous space pirate who hates her guts, so I guess I can't blame her for defending herself, but to hear her season-long burden of guilt over what happened with Anisha and Caleb reduced to basically, I wish I could have handled things better, but you did break the law, feels like a flinch on the part of the creators. So does the characterization of Braca. Again, Giamatti is great, and it's wonderful to get to watch him hold court, literally. But Braca's grievances with the Federation are robbed of most of their bite and boiled down to Starfleet attacked the planet where we lived when I was a kid, which is then revealed to not even be true, because it was actually Braca's father who was responsible for the destruction of their colony when a weapon he was building to attack the Federation accidentally exploded and ignited the planet's polluted atmosphere. Well, never mind then. He's just a villain with a personal grudge based on incorrect facts. Yay, Starfleet! I'm not saying those revelations completely invalidate all of Braca's earlier criticisms of the Federation. I'm saying it feels like the episode wants us to think they do. The episode tries to resolve shades of gray into black and white, and that's just not as interesting to me as drama, and it greatly dulls the edge of the show's social and political commentary. Braca is ultimately the villain, and Starfleet is ultimately on the side of good, but it's a lot more compelling when the situation is more complex than just that. On a related note, I don't really like Noose Braca as a galactic threat-level villain. He's a lot more interesting as a dirtbag space pirate. In his earlier appearances, he gives the impression of being a relatively small-time operator. He's dangerous, he's a killer, but he doesn't have big ambitions. His concerns mostly revolve around business and making money and keeping the Federation off his back. When he attacks the Athena in the first episode, he just wants to steal its warp engine so he can sell it. When he is brought in to help out against the space cannibals in episode 6, his main demand in exchange for his assistance is for the Federation to stop supplying a particular planet with dilithium because that's hurting the profits of an interstellar rest stop he controls. Now, in this episode, thanks to his stolen Omega-47 weapons, he's not merely a member of the Venari Rawl, he's the leader of the Venari Rawl. And he's powerful enough to trap the entire Federation behind a wall. Yawn. Where's my sneering, thieving little dirtbag? I want my dirtbag back. Over on the Athena, we get some classic Star Trek teamwork. There's a payoff to a setup I didn't know was a setup until we got the payoff, which I always love when I see. In this case, it's the scenario of Jet Reno being in command of the ship while the cadets serve as her bridge crew. In an earlier episode, we saw Reno in command of the ship with the cadets serving as the crew in a simulation that was part of a class, and the simulation did not end well. Now, in this episode, we see that same scenario play out for real, with real stakes. It's a nice bit of storytelling, and Tig Notaro is great playing Jet Reno in teacher mode. She doesn't lose that bone-dry wit and somehow manages to give encouragement and pep talks while maintaining her flawless deadpan delivery, which is impressive. In the end, Noose Braca is defeated, the Federation is freed from his Omega-47 mines, and Anisha accepts Caleb's new life as a Starfleet cadet. Caleb gives a little speech about how he found a home and friends at the Academy and how he can be a part of that world without forgetting where he comes from. And it's nice, but it also felt a little too close to that Starfleet is good because we're friends and we care about each other bullshit they tried to get away with on Strange New Worlds this past season. The members of your organization being good to each other does not erase your organization's flaws and shortcomings. Despite my problems with it, this isn't a terrible episode. The fact that I would rank it as the second worst episode of the season, superior only to the atrocious episode 5, speaks just as much to the high quality of the other episodes as it does to the relatively low quality of this one. And the actual conclusion of the episode, with the cadets gathering in front of a window aboard the Athena, Caleb having now fully accepted his friends as his chosen family, that's a good note to close out the season on. Now for a few thoughts on the season as a whole. You know, this Starfleet Academy concept has been in the works off and on in one form or another for decades. At one point, the follow-up film to Star Trek V was going to be a Starfleet Academy story. The origins of this series can be traced back to 2018 and recurred periodically for several more years before finally being officially announced in 2023. After such a long period of informal and formal development, it's not only nice that the show finally got made, that it exists, but also that it's this good. It turns out the long wait and the extended stop and start development was a good thing because it allowed the creators to set the show in the years following Star Trek Discovery and take advantage of the relatively clean slate provided by Discovery's mid-series jump from the 23rd to the 32nd century. Starfleet Academy takes the concept of the burn, introduced in Season 3 of Discovery, and improves on it in two ways. First, it refers to it only indirectly and never talks about what actually caused the burn, which is for the best, given what an eye roller that reveal was when Season 3 of Disco finally got around to it. Second, it uses the burn and the ongoing recovery from the burn to position the Federation as a once great civilization that is trying for a comeback. That is a fresh angle that we haven't seen from a Star Trek series before. Well, that we haven't seen explored very deeply in a Star Trek series before. Discovery introduced the idea, but never really did a whole lot with it. And it gives the Federation a layer of real-world relevance, since a lot of us view the United States, and more broadly the West, as a declining civilization in desperate need of a moral and cultural revival. By which I mean kicking the fucking Nazis and other autocrats and bigots out of the halls of power, for a start, in case that wasn't clear. As I mentioned earlier, the post-burn setting also allows the show to frame the Academy itself as an institution that is trying to rebuild. That strengthens the central premise of the series. This isn't just any Academy class. They're the first class at the traditional San Francisco campus in over a century. And it puts the Academy and its instructors and cadets in the position of having to prove themselves, to demonstrate that there is still a need for their institution in this darker, tougher, less hopeful world. A strong premise isn't of much use without good characters, and Starfleet Academy over-delivers on that front. Everyone, cadets and instructors, regulars, recurring players, and guest stars, is clearly defined and written to leave an impression right away, so we get a sense of who they are. The cadets are introduced as obvious types. Caleb, the delinquent, Genesis, the overachiever, Darum, the asshole, and so on. And they begin transcending those types almost immediately. Darum especially becomes a fascinating and multi-layered character before our eyes after being set up as a stereotypical jock bully in his first scene. It's really a joy to watch his development throughout the season. The teacher-mentor characters are likewise strongly defined from the start and likewise allowed to develop in sometimes surprising ways. I've already talked about how many different sides there are to Captain Ake, how unexpectedly funny Cadet Master Lurathok is, the added range we see out of Jet Reno, and what a great job the writers and Robert Picardo do with the Doctor this season. There's also Kelrick, the War College Chancellor, who somehow manages to come across as both a competent and honorable officer and an uptight buffoon, and eventually Caleb's mom, Anisha, played by Tatiana Maslany, who finds just the right balance between coldly pragmatic survivor and parent who genuinely wants the best for her son. The relationships between the cadets are complicated in a way that feels realistic for characters in this age group. There are multiple will they, won't they dynamics happening simultaneously between Caleb and Terima, who eventually do, Caleb and Genesis, who don't, but I say give that one time, Genesis and Darum, give that one time too. Darum and Jaden, that one's definitely happening. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the series, whenever that is, Darum has fucked everybody. There are also complicated platonic relationships that grow and evolve throughout the season between Caleb and Darum, Caleb and Jaden, Genesis and Sam, Caleb and Sam, and even Genesis and Terima, who start to get to know each other late in the season after Terima is forced to transfer to the Academy from the War College. I'm very happy to see that, like Discovery before it, the diversity in the characters of Starfleet Academy includes their sexuality. Discovery did its best to make up for a lot of lost time in terms of queer representation in Star Trek, and while there was also a little bit in Lower Decks and Picard, there hasn't been a whole lot in Strange New Worlds so far, which has been disappointing. In this first season of Starfleet Academy, though, Darum is bisexual, Jaden is gay, Jet Reno and Laura Thok are a couple, and best of all, the show doesn't put the sexuality of its queer characters on conspicuous display as though it's waiting for us to notice and offer our congratulations. I hate this term, but it feels like it fits in this instance. There's no virtue signaling. The sexuality of the queer characters isn't announced or treated like a big deal that everyone has to stop and pay attention to. It simply becomes apparent as the show goes on. Darum mentions that he's had affairs with both men and women. Jaden shows interest in other guys and eventually starts dating one, a war college cadet named Kyle, who, as I already mentioned, is a total zero who doesn't even know how to avoid getting sunburned. How hard can it be to apply sunscreen in the year 3190 whatever? Kyle! Speaking of Jaden being gay, obviously, and unfortunately, there have been the usual complaints against him from small-minded bigots in the audience who just don't want to see anything queer on TV at all. But I've also seen complaints from the pro-gay side saying that Jaden is too stereotypically gay, or that he's not stereotypically Klingon enough. I saw a comment from someone who said, I'm supportive of the idea of a gay Klingon, but why'd they have to make him a twink? And what? Again, I admit my opinion on this is not the one that should be deferred to. I'm a cis hetero guy. I have no special insight into the gay community or the gay experience, but I think I know what people mean when they describe someone as a twink, and that's not what I'm getting from Jaden. Is it because he's a pacifist? Or because he enjoys bird watching? Or because he occasionally wears a skirt? I've seen people criticize his portrayal as bad representation because the creators of the show introduced a gay Klingon but felt they had to emasculate him. Jaden doesn't seem emasculated to me. Like I said, maybe I'm missing something as the clueless straight dude, but I just don't get that one. I like Jaden a lot, as himself, as the character we see him being in the show, and also as the anchor for the Klingon presence in the show, which isn't very large, but is still, for my money, the best portrayal of Klingons in the current era of Star Trek so far. Their situation, as seen in Episode 4, losing their homeworld, living in a diaspora, feels borrowed from the plight of the Romulans in the first season of Star Trek Picard, but this show does a way better job with that story, so I don't mind. The Klingons of the Starfleet Academy series display a broad range of personalities and lifestyles. There's Jaden, who shuns the typical warrior mentality in pursuit of an honorable life as a healer. There's Jaden's family, who we see in Episode 4, who seem more conventionally Klingon, but who are also living a very modest, nomadic existence that is unlike what we've seen from Klingons on past Star Trek shows, who were mostly defined one way or another by their relationship to the mighty Klingon Empire. And there's Obel Wochak, the leader of the Klingon diaspora, who shows up in Episode 4 to first reject the offer of a new homeworld, then conquer it in an obviously fake battle that Starfleet stages to preserve that all-important Klingon pride. Wochak is only present for a few scenes, but like most characters in the series, he makes a strong impression right away. He's more sophisticated and articulate than we might expect from a Klingon. He's not a growling, posturing bully. He's sly and smooth. He reminds me of the Klingons we see in Star Trek VI, the kind of Klingons who quote literature and listen to classical music. You know, big city Klingons with their fancy book learning and highfalutin airs. But you just know they're still big, dumb space cavemen at heart. More important than the range of Klingons, because that's really only in one episode, is the range of tones that we see throughout the season. This is a show made by artists who are confident enough to know they don't have to remain in the same mode all the time. From episode to episode, sometimes from scene to scene within the same episode, the show is funny and zany, earnest, action-heavy, and almost action-less. Sometimes the actors are playing to the cheap seats, going as big and theatrical as they can get away with, and sometimes they're saying all they need to say with a look and silence. To pull that off, you need not just good writers and good characters, but great actors. And I want to shout out the entire regular cast because they all do tremendous work this season. Sandro Rasta as Caleb, Karine Diane as Jaden, Carice Brooks as Sam, George Hawkins as Darum, Bella Shepherd as Genesis, Zoe Steiner as Terima, those are the cadets, plus Oded Fair as Admiral Vance, another Discovery alumnus, Gina Yashir as Lura Thok, Tig Notaro, who I've praised already as Jet Reno, and the big three in terms of the importance of their performances to the success of the show: Holly Hunter as Captain Ake, Robert Picardo as the Doctor, and Paul Giamatti as Nus Braca. Holly Hunter is in every episode. She's the captain, she's the chancellor, she's the series lead. She's brilliant. She creates in Captain Ake a character with incredible range and depth, and I just can't tell you how happy I am with the job she's done. We Trekkies are so lucky to have Holly fucking Hunter on a Star Trek show. Picardo, I sang his praises earlier, so I'll just reiterate. He doesn't just revisit the Doctor from Voyager, he reinvents him as a character of grand tragedy and poignant humanity, the sort of character who belongs in one of those operas he's always listening to. And oh yeah, he's also still often very, very funny. Picardo is brilliant. Paul Giamatti, he's wanted to be in Star Trek for a long time. He finally gets his wish, and holy shit does he knock this out of the park. The quibbles I have with the character's portrayal in the season finale are rooted in the writing, not the acting. The acting is never a problem. Giamatti plays Nus Braca with gusto, with passion, biting into every juicy line he gets, and the result is a joy to behold. One of the great pleasures of watching film and television is getting to see a genuinely brilliant actor just cut loose and ham it up, and that is a gift which Paul Giamatti gives to us in Season 1 of Starfleet Academy. The show focuses on new stuff, new characters, minimal pandering fan service references and Easter eggs, except for the unrestrained splooging of nerdy nostalgia all over Episode 5. There are a few imports from Discovery: Jet Reno, Admiral Vance, Tilly for one episode, and one very prominent legacy character, the Doctor, but crucially, the show isn't built around them. It's built around the original stuff. There's a relative lack of technobabble, and what technobabble there is mostly incidental, not load-bearing as far as the plot goes. That's nice. The structure of the season is exactly how it should be, how I wish every TV series was structured. I've done videos about it before. I call it album structure because I like to compare it to how a musician arranges tracks on an album, dividing it in half, placing the high points in the right positions so that each song, or episode in this case, has a chance to stand out on its own, and the whole project has a unity and a flow. Season 1 of Starfleet Academy is 10 episodes. Episode 1 introduces the concept, the villain, the major story arcs. Episodes 2, 3, 4, and 5 are standalone stories that keep those plot threads introduced in Episode 1 going, but don't focus on them. Episode 6, the villain returns. Some of the story and character arcs that have been running so far are resolved, some are continued, and some new ones are introduced. Episodes 7 and 8, standalone stories, but we see characters dealing with the consequences of events from episode 6, and then episodes 9 and 10 are a two-part conclusion where everything that is still unresolved gets resolved. It doesn't play like a movie that's been stretched out and chopped into 10 pieces. It plays like a goddamn TV series. Is it perfect? No. As you can tell from my comments on the individual episodes, I have my problems with it. In addition to what I've said already, some episodes have really off-putting, heavy-handed color grading. Not a fan of that. At times, characters make choices that feel mandated by the plot rather than arising naturally from them and their situations. This happens a few times between Caleb and Terima. Sam, who I love, finds herself attached to multiple legacy characters, which isn't ideal, and Sam's transformation in episode 8, which again is by far the best episode of the season, feels badly placed within the season. After the childhood she experiences in that episode, she's a different character, a new Sam. But because there are only 2 episodes left after that, and they're both fairly packed with plot, we see very little of the new Sam. Also, some episodes are too long. The length never spoils an episode, and I don't recall any points where the show obviously drags, but there are definitely scenes that could have been improved by a tighter edit, or better yet, another pass on the script to allow things to come to a point sooner. And yes, I realize the bitter irony of me making that criticism in this long-ass review video. One of the recurring criticisms during this era of television, not just of Star Trek, but of TV in general, is that the seasons are too short. Fans want more episodes. On one hand, I get it. As an American who grew up in the 1980s and 90s, I've also been used to TV shows producing seasons of 20-something episodes, but A, short seasons are not unusual in other parts of the world. 10, 8, or 6 episode seasons, or even shorter, have been the norm in the UK since forever. And B, the number of episodes in a season has absolutely no bearing on the quality of those individual episodes, or on the quality of the season as a whole. If a 10-episode season feels cramped, or rushed, or whatever, that means the creators of those 10 episodes should have made different choices and done a better job of using the time they had in those 10 episodes. This is my opinion, and like every other opinion I've shared in this video, it's just my subjective point of view. Take it as you will, but if something doesn't work, the fix usually isn't to make more of it. In conclusion, just take a second. Breathe in, savor it, it's almost over. Star Trek Starfleet Academy is a good show. And if you've been thinking about watching it but haven't yet, let me encourage you to do so. If you're reluctant to subscribe to Paramount Plus, either for financial or moral reasons, I get that, I support that. I'm sure you can borrow a copy from your friend Roger. You know, the jolly one. Maybe you'll like the show, maybe you won't. But give it a chance. Watch it and see how you feel about it based on the show, not what people say about it on social media and dog shit bottom-feeding clickbait websites. It's not perfect, but it's exactly the kind of show Star Trek should be making. It doesn't feel like a prequel or a sequel to anything. A handful of legacy characters and some gratuitous fan service aside, it's mostly freestanding and about itself and its own characters and stories, and it's an episodically structured season with threads running throughout to tie it all together. I liked it. I looked forward to each new episode, and I now look forward to season 2 and, fingers crossed, hopefully more to come after that. Star Trek Starfleet Academy's first season easily earns a passing grade.